Hey, in this video we're going to be starting with an empty Unity scene and just exploring the interface, creating a few things. So here we are in Unity in this new project that's been opened up, and so you're dropped right into an empty scene, and scenes are how Unity manages sort of this abstract idea of like what is a level or a stage. Maybe like different menus can be arranged as scenes, but they're the big structural component that you put together to make your games. You can manage scenes clicking on File. You can add a new scene, open scenes, or save your current scene. Scenes, you'll be hopefully drawing your attention to the hierarchy panel over here. It says the name of your scene. Right now this is named sample scene, and it has a list of all of the objects in your scene. So here, when I click on one of these objects, you can see that this other panel over on the right changes. So this is the inspector panel, and the inspector panel tells you all of the details about that object. That's where you can change things like its position and its rotation, some of the properties of its different components. And components is a big word that you're going to hear in Unity. The way that Unity structures its objects, its game objects, is that each game object is kind of just like an empty container. Say you create a player object. Your player is just going to be an empty object. To actually give it behavior and give it a way to store information, you add components to it. And so it's kind of like little building blocks. You can stack up these blocks and pile them into one object, and then that object suddenly has all these new behaviors and ways to interact with it. So for example, this camera object, main camera, comes with two components, three components. Two of them look like they have stuff I can mess with. Transform component. In Unity, every object comes with a transform component. It's just built in. That gives it its orientation and its position in space. So you can see my in my main view here, where I can scroll in and out. I can middle click to drag around to kind of pan my view. And right click will rotate. You can also see there's an indication there, like a little tetrad thing next to that I symbol, indicating that arrow keys or WASD can also be used to move around when you're holding your right click. You can also orbit by holding Alt and doing a left click, and you can rotate around some central point. So when I'm looking in this view, I see my camera there, and depending on which tool I have selected, I can manipulate some of the properties of this object. A common one is to go up to your tools row here in the upper corner and select the Move tool. The Move tool will show you three different axes of movement. These are X is the red one, Y is the green one, and Z is the blue one. And this may be a little different from math class if you've done any 3D coordinate systems in math class. Usually Z is up, but Unity has these switched. This is more of a traditional thing in computer graphics to have Y pointing upward. But what this means is that when you look at this from the viewpoint of the camera is kind of looking at the world as if it is XY coordinates. And so that's kind of useful. Alright, so if I do grab one of these arrows, I can move this object along that axis. I can also grab planes, these little plane handles, to move along two axes at once in 2 dimensions. And I can always Control Z to undo those things. So we can do this to any object in our world here. We can move it around. There's also a directional light object, and we can move that one around. But for directional lights, it's really the direction that matters. If you think about the sun being like practically infinitely far away, where all the rays are coming in parallel to our world, it doesn't matter where the sun is, just which direction it's shining. All right. When you are looking at the hierarchy view, the panel over here, you can also right-click in here and get some options. There's Create Empty and all of these other categories for creating new objects, new game objects. There are a couple of other ways to get to that. You can press the plus button here, has the same list. There's also Game Object menu at the top, where you also get that list. So 3 different ways to kind of do the same thing when you're creating objects. I like, just because it's quick and immediate, I like using the right click menu, and let's say create a cube. So now I have a cube just sitting there in the middle of my scene, and sometimes the position isn't exactly what you want. These look kind of arbitrary. So I like to reposition it back to 0, 0, 0. That's the origin of my 3-dimensional space here. You can also click on kind of the settings button for this component and press reset, and that'll set everything to 0. So the cube has this basic cube comes with a bunch of components already that kind of describe its shape and how it's going to show up on the screen and how it's going to interact when things hit it. So if I wanted to do just a little sample messing around with this thing, I would want a platform for it to rest on. So let me create one of those. I'll right click in my hierarchy, a 3D object, plane. So planes, of course, are not really 3D objects, but they exist in a 3D space, so it makes sense. I'm going to reset the transform for this plane, and you'll see it kind of intersects with that cube. So let me move my cube up a little bit. Oops. Select the cube, move it up a little bit. And then let me create another object. Let's create a sphere. Reset the transform, and then let's bring it up, offset it just a little bit. Alright, that looks fine. And you can see our scene starting to take shape here. So the cube is very similar to the sphere. The sphere has these different components that give it its shape, how it's going to show up on the screen, and how it's going to collide. But if I just run this, let me go up to the top, press the play button, you'll see that everything just kind of hangs out, just stays there. I haven't given any of these objects a component that lets them interact with gravity. So they're just sitting there, and that's fine. You should also notice that this switched automatically into my game scene, or my game view here, which is what you'll actually see while you're playing. And it's kind of cool that you can leave this running, keep it on play, and switch back to the scene view, and you can manipulate things, mess around with the world while this thing is running, and it actually changes in the game view at the same time. You can also dock any of these tabs to a different spot in your interface here, and then you can mess around with things and see how they act. What I would like, though, is for this ball to fall. So let me stop my playback here by pressing the play button again, and you'll notice that everything went back, got reverted back to the way it was before I started playing. So all your changes when you're playing are temporary. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, you'll see all of your changes get reverted. It's an important point because you need to make sure that you're not making all of your changes to your game while it's playing, because then you'll just lose those changes, and that can be kind of frustrating. Okay, let me add a component onto this thing. Let me see. select the ball in the scene view, select the sphere, and add a component. So I'm going to look for a rigid body. There's two of them, one for two-dimensional games and one for three-dimensional. So choose rigid body. And the rigid body component controls, of course, all of the interactions with collision and the physics engine. So there's a use gravity toggle that I'll leave on so that we can have this thing fall. The mass is not that important unless you want to change it relative to other objects in the scene. And there's some other interesting things here that we can discuss later. And now, when I play this, watch it in my game view, there we go. As time goes, well, there it goes, drops off the edge for forever. Alright, well, that's the first step. You should understand from this sort of the basic layout of Unity and how to interact with objects. You'll also notice this panel in the bottom. This is our last panel to talk about, where you can switch between the project panel and the console. The console is going to give you information, messages about what's happening in your game, and you can even choose messages, choose to display your own messages there. It also gives you errors when there's a problem with your project. And then in the project panel, this is where you manage all of the different objects, assets in your game. So you'll find scenes in here. You can create textures and 3D models and add them in here. Sound effects and animations. All of those things are kind of like files that you'll be storing in your project, and they are reusable and separate from your scene objects here. Those exist inside your scene file. Alright, make sure to save often, Control S or File Save, and I will see you in the next video.